Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
John, how are you doing?
Sam, I'm doing okay. Certainly better than I should be doing here on, I think, what you just called Obliteration Day,
right.
The day after Liberation Day.
That's right. It's a big day for a lot of people.
And so, we could have talked about anything this week that we wanted.
It's just hard not to talk about it.
It's hard not to talk about tariffs, and I feel as though we've talked about tariffs ad nauseum, not just on this podcast, but just in general with clients. I make a fair amount of public presentations. People are asking me about it. Tariffs. But when you take a look at what's going on in the markets, when you take a look at, I would argue, maybe the more fragile state of the overall health of the U.S. economy, you have to kind of wonder, is there any sort of real thought process behind all these tariffs outside of, I'm just going to do this and be a bully?
Well, we part of what we've talked about with it is that it's kind of an emotionally charged or driven issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still where a lot of this is coming from. Yeah. And, there's this broad theory or hope that they could, it sounds great. Get other countries. We're the biggest, baddest, strongest, whatever word you want to call.
Sort of use our economic leverage to get other
others to pay our revenue,
and
instead of our own citizens. That sounds phenomenal.
Yes, it does. I love it.
I would love that.
Yeah.
The execution of that through tariffs.
Does it really work that way?
Well, we know how tariffs work, and the answer is no. And so we're tiptoeing this line. Part of it's negotiating and how much of this is set in stone versus how much of this can be walked back. And there's been, cracks and openings to what can be walked back. And so I think the difficulty is that it's just so unknown. And clearly the market was shocked at the severity of it yesterday. Yes. There's no way the market would not have been green, 0.75 of a point leading into it, and then down 3 to 6%, depending on what you look at, if it wasn't surprise.
Well, I would tell you that, and we still officially sort of feel this way, that the tariffs that have been announced and have been threatened and now have been announced are largely negotiation tactics to get whatever the president may or may not want. However, and I think most people probably felt that way until yesterday when he made all those announcements. It really does seem like perhaps he really is trying to raise revenue. Perhaps he really is trying to onshore all this production. Maybe he is trying to do all this stuff and kind of fight back the lessons we have learned throughout history about what happens when you put protectionist tariffs, or even, dare I say, punitive tariffs on the economy, and really, in this instance, the global economy. And so that is what has folks running for the hills. I have friends of mine, we've never even talked about the economy at all, sending me, Wikipedia pages about the Smoot-Hawley tariff or Hawley tariff and what have you, and going, what does this mean? And they tell Norris, tell me what you're thinking about all this. And it's all relatively new to everyone in this industry. I don't care how much gray hair you have. You really can't remember a period of time prior to this president, 40 to 45 and 47, whatever it is, prior to Donald Trump, sitting there and being serious about enacting, one, not just tariffs, but then tariffs of really pretty eye-popping percentages.
Higher than the Smoot-Hawley.
Yeah, I mean, really kind of like going, the Vietnamese, 46%, really? China gets, 34, 35%, but the Japanese get...
tack another on the 20 for the fentanyl for the Chinese. And then you even had Scott Bessent say, I think that's it.
And then India and Japan go 24%. I mean, some amount you're kind of going, what's going on here? There's something else going on here that perhaps investors don't understand, and that's what has people freaked out.
Well, at the end of the day, look, investing, what you're doing is buying promises of future cash flow. Largely.
Yeah, that's all you're doing.
To boil it all down. And so a premium that you're paying for in that is the confidence in it. That tends to be why companies with more stable earnings or a confident projection, you're willing to pay more for that, even if the earnings are way out in the future, but if you feel really good about it. So you have a confidence premium built into this. That is really, the earnings themselves, we'll see once we get earnings guidance over the next few weeks with companies.
Guidance?
Yeah, if we get it.
We're not going to get any guidance.
But even if you do, the guidance we are going to get is going to have wider disparity than it would have had, and arguably. And so that's, the earnings haven't come in poorly. It's not like we're seeing an immediate reaction to bad earnings to the actual things you're investing in. Right now, it has largely been, I'm less confident. I'm willing to pay less for stuff in the future because I don't really know if it's going to be there.
Yeah, and so that is what's going on throughout the entire markets here today. And I would be shocked if we didn't see a pretty substantial decrease in overall business and consumer sentiment, because people are scared things are just going to cost that much more money, both as a consumer and then as well as businesses, the inputs for their own business. And when that happens, people don't want to spend money. Or either that or they front end load all of their expenditures, meaning that no matter what happens next month, we're not spending as much money.
Yeah, and we've talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy that all this can be.
Yes.
If things can be fine, but if you think a recession's coming, that can lead to a recession.
Yeah.
A recession is a contraction in spending largely, and that's a big part of it. And so if you think that's coming, you go ahead and contract on spending. Well, there you have it.
Yeah, you want to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, but you start the snowball.
Yeah.
And so that I think is where the consumer confidence comes into play, with the unknowns that we're seeing right now.
Well, and I got to tell you that I think there has to be some kind of method to the president's madness. One hopes that there is. Some of it, it doesn't seem quantifiable. The calculations seem a little screwy.
Well,
and I know that you've talked about that. The Swiss have gone, what in the world's going on?
They said it's incomprehensible.
And so if I'm in Japan, if I'm in some other country that's just been hit with sort of a surprisingly large tariff, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you're important to my market, but my market's important to me too. And what do I care about U.S. workers if all of a sudden I have to shift all this production to the United States? Then people are out of work here in Japan, or people are out of work here in Poland, people are out of work here in Vietnam, or something along those lines. I don't think maybe the administration understands all of that. Okay, everyone will probably work out some kind of deal and try to save face, all that type of stuff. I get it. But Vietnam with a 46% tariff, the people in Hanoi aren't going to go, okay, we're going to, our firms are going to do all of their production in the United States, because Vietnamese have to work too.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm not sure if Washington fully understands what it's doing with these tariffs.
Well, and the way they calculated it, we talked about this previously, but it's basically the other countries' net exports to the United States, and so obviously Vietnam exports a lot more to the United States, a large consumer-driven economy.
I think we're running a pretty massive deficit.
Then we export to them.
Yeah.
And so say it's $150 billion and $10 billion we're sending back there. That's a large.
That's a large deficit.
And so they are viewing that as how we are getting screwed over by these countries. And that's where they're getting these 80-90%. Because it's directly correlated to how much of an export-driven economy these are. And the math lines up pretty well with this equation. And I've even seen their deputy press secretary release it and make it seem a lot more confusing than it is with a bunch of Greek letters. But that's what it is at the end of the day.
Make it much more. I love it, because you think if you want to confuse someone, just throw a bunch of Greek letters in
it.
But you're right about that. No thought process appears to be going into whether or not Vietnam might have a comparative advantage or something. Whether or not the United States produces things that the Vietnamese consumer wants. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to tell you, Sam, that the playing field is level with all these countries. I'm not going to tell you that. There is a lot of protectionism out there, and we're now playing part in it. However, you don't run the type of trade deficit that we have run in the United States simply because everyone else is trying to screw us, in my estimation.
Well, and I think a part that has been missing from the conversation is that we are the global reserve currency.
Yes.
There's a massive comparative advantage to that.
Yes.
And so, okay, if I'm some of these other countries, why don't we make the yuan the global reserve currency?
Well,
I get they may not be in the position to want to do that.
That might be a topic for a different.
Yeah, but there are advantages and disadvantages to both circumstances.
Well, I would
be in the United States and to be in, and then I think at the other point, is, do we want to be competitive on some of this stuff?
Not on all of it. I mean, if you were to sit there and ask people throughout the Deep South, do you really want to go back and work on the textile mills? Most people would probably say, not much. Not so much. That wasn't great. That wasn't great. I'm okay. And the same thing if you go in the Carolinas and go, hey, do you want to go work in the cigarette making facilities the way they were back in the 30s and 40s? You want to do that? Nah, I'm good. And so a lot of this manufacturing that is done overseas now, particularly textiles, and that's not done in the United States any longer, we're not ever getting that back. I mean, we're just not getting that type of stuff back. And in terms of the jobs loss, if that is part of the administration's goal, was to really ramp up domestic manufacturing employment, if any of these jobs come back from overseas, let's say if these firms start to produce here more in the United States, it's going to be done with technology. That's how manufacturers will keep the unit labor costs down.
Well, we've talked about it, how this painting with a broad brush, but we export really high margin stuff and we import really low margin stuff.
Yes.
So, that almost gives these other countries a bigger weapon in terms of talking about tariffs. I mean, to damage the companies here that are exporting.
Well, I mean, the textiles are a perfect example. I mean, what are the margins on textiles?
5%.
I mean, so that's not even a huge return. So I mean, you're going to have to figure out what manufacturer is going to want to to onshore all this type of stuff and figure out a way to cut costs so they can still make their 5 to 10%. Because that's what they're making. Now, don't get me wrong. Our trade representatives really didn't do a very good job in protecting us when we made deals with Asia and what have you. And yeah, I'd like to get some of those jobs back, and I'd love to shrink our trade deficit somewhat. But at what price do we do that? Do we run the entire economy into the dirt right now in order to get those jobs back, or do we do it a little bit more subtly?
Well, it seems.
I mean, or do we do things that we can do a better job controlling? You can talk to any manufacturer and sit there and say the EPA's down my back on little stuff, or OSHA's coming in, or just all the regulations that are now involved with setting up a business. I mean, you want to know confusion? Open up a business in the United States and all of that.
But a lot of the emotional feelings around this, and we all can think of these towns that used to have these booming or somewhat booming economies due to industries that left, right?
Yes.
It's frictional employment, or frictional unemployment rather, that is really the emotional driven pain point of this. That our economy used to have textiles, there's all these towns in Alabama we could mention that had
all textile towns,
one industry, and they did it pretty well, and it had an economy, and then it left. The frictional employment, without solving that doesn't really solve the issues. I mean, ideally, if we could wave a magic wand to be like, hey, let's bring other industries into here, bring tech industries into here, that a lot of the big cities are trying to do, and decrease that frictional employment instead of trying to bring something back that, frankly, what we imported was deflation by doing that.
Well, that's the point that I was going to bring up. About the same time that we started running these massive trade deficits is also about the same time we got a whole bunch of cheap products. It used to be that we made all of the televisions here in the United States.
They're massively expensive.
Very expensive. The last television I bought was almost a disposable item. And so when you take a look at just the sheer amount we have consumed, which is kind of vulgar in a way, as a society, we would not have been able to accumulate all this crap if we were still producing all of it in the United States, because the cost would just be that much higher. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't protect our industries a little bit more and somehow, but is it through throwing tariffs out there the way that we've done, which will inhibit trade? There's no other way there's no way to put it. These tariffs will inhibit trade if they are left in place.
How much do you think this changes, like, a long-term direction for some of these other countries? I mean, we've seen it, and we've talked about what happened with Germany. We talked about it with the indices over there and how they've exploded in a good way. Does this, have other countries focus on themselves more and how they can develop their own economy away from the United States? And is that a long-term trend?
I think you bring up a great question, and I think that is what the long-term outcome is going to be on this. I think personally that a China, a Germany, or some of these
even Canada, even Mexico,
all these sort of more export-driven economies will do what they need to alleviate or mitigate the short-term pain, make some promises to Washington, but Germany would be well advised to figure out something else. I mean, let's move to a different direction. Same thing with the Chinese. Now, our market is huge, and we've got a ton of money, but there are a lot of other markets out there. And so what I think will happen more than likely is that marginal exporter in a European country will likely start thinking about ways to increase its domestic share or its share in the continent, or maybe, dare I say, look to the Middle East or some other such places in order to get product out the door, as opposed to relying solely on the United States for its well-being. And that's what I think the likelihood's going to be, because let's face it. I mean, if you're a manufacturer in another country right now, or you're in politics in another country, can you really count on the United States to be a stable trading partner?
Well, that's what I was going to bring up, and it goes back to the point about investments being a kind of a measuring stick for future confidence. That's not just investing in stocks; that's investing your company's resources. Yeah. And so it can very quickly create opportunity for other places and other countries, just by creating a pathway for more confidence.
Well, then also the way that we run our elections here in the United States. Kind of like, okay, let's take a German auto manufacturer. Let's take BMW. Yeah, they can produce a few extra vehicles, I'm sure, in their Spartanburg assembly facility, and maybe not produce quite as many in Puebla or wherever their facility is in Mexico, where I actually think that's Volkswagen that's got that. But it's kind of like, okay, what do I do here? Do I put up $1 billion facility in the United States to avoid the tariff, when in 3 years, if this guy keeps it up, Republicans will be out of power, and then we're going to get the Democrats back in, and they'll get rid of all these tariffs at this.
Look, I think we're talking 2 years now.
Yeah,
I think we're very quickly talking about a possible blue wave at the midterms, and so how much that's able to slow down the agenda of the administration. I've mentioned a few companies in the past that have said this in their earnings, that we talk about 10, 20, 30, 40-year cycles of investments, and so we are not going to be making policy changes based on a few years. And so, yeah, when you talk about countries that are economically vulnerable, maybe they don't have as much ability to wait it out, but a lot of these companies have pretty good ability to wait it out.
Particularly if waiting it out is now a year and a half.
Yeah, it's a year and a half. Maybe we pass on a little bit as much as we can, and we have a little weaker earnings for 6 quarters, and
we just kind of suffer through it. So that's the whole thing here. Under foreign investors, manufacturers, firms, what have you, just understand what our politics is like. And so, what's the likelihood that if Democrats storm back into power in the Congress in a couple of years, 18 months or whenever it is, that they're going to keep all of these tariffs in place?
Yeah.
And particularly, what happens in 2028? If a Democrat wins the presidential election, what's the likelihood we're going to keep all these tariffs in place? So if I'm a foreign manufacturer, I'm going to make $1 billion decision.
Mm-hmm.
$1 billion decision. I mean, that's about what we're talking about here for some of these major facilities.
It's more than that.
Yeah. Am I going to make $1 billion decisions based on something that may not even exist in 2 years?
May not even exist in a week.
All that type of stuff. And the answer to that is clearly no. And so
you can't even build it. And some of these things you couldn't even build in 4 years.
And so for me, listen, all this stuff is, I think, shrinking the trade deficit, not a bad idea. I think leveling the playing field, not a bad idea. How are we going to level the playing field? Have we done the right math? What have we done to our own policies and procedures? Well, have we examined those to figure out ways to shrink our unit labor costs in the United States before we go and put an impediment to trade on the global scale? Have we done all these things? And that's what investors here today, with all the red ink, here we are, what's today, the 3rd?
Yep.
With the Dow down 1,400 points at certain points, these are the questions that investors are asking. It's not just me. It's not just you, Sam. It's not just people listening to this. It's people around the world going, what the hell's going on? Yeah. Am I going to really make long-term decisions and spend a ton of money, when all this can change overnight? And in the meantime, I'm just going to sit this one out. I'm just going to take some money off the table because I'm real unclear what success looks like with this, and even more unclear what the next 2-3 quarters of economic activity looks like. And as a result, I think I'm fine putting it into a T-bill. I think I'm fine putting it into a money market account, just riding it out for a little bit.
Not an abnormal reaction.
Not an abnormal reaction. So, and I would imagine, if you were to ask anyone in the administration, they are probably a little bit surprised by how the markets are responding here today.
Yeah.
I would imagine. All right. Well, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we got to say, you can always go to oakworth.com, oakworth.com, take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab, and find links to all kinds of exciting information, including previous episodes of the Trading Perspectives podcast, links to our newsletter/blog, Common Sense, links to our quarterly analysis, macro and market, as well as other intermittent articles and commentary, including those by Mac Frazier and the remainder of the advisory services group. How about that, Sam?
I like it.
All right. Well, before I say all right, got to ask, got any famous last words on this exciting topic?
That's it.
That's it today. That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.